Hello, I'm Naomi Ruth, and so where did this idea come from to turn Gregory of Tours' The History of the Franks into a musical? Well, last year, back in 2015, around October or November, I was doing medieval history with my high schoolers. Now, we had started up a little bit north in Northumbria, Saxons, Britain, that's general area, and my students absolutely hated it. Pretty much all of them absolutely abhorred it. We were learning about Dagoberts and Ethelberts and Egberts, I think was their least favorite. Erkenbert. They even hate Robert now because they were so done with all of the Berts. So in the second semester, we ended up going down south into Frankish territory. France, Gaul, that's general area above the, I'm going to forget the name, the mountain range above Spain. And so they liked it better, and in some ways it was a relief because now I was teaching from Gregory of Tours' The History of the Franks, so it was one book instead of a collection of 500 different tiny little pieces that we had read the quarter before. And so there was this nice arc now, there were characters that were coming back, and it was much easier to see the personality that was happening in the stories and to actually have a story instead of weird little pieces of information. So that was a relief to have this nice story arc that was happening. But in other ways, it was a struggle and it was kind of difficult because reading The History of the Franks actually made me physically ill. Reading it made me want to actually throw up everywhere, which was an odd response because this was coming out of the year before we had done Herodotus and Livy, and those are pretty bloodthirsty stories. And they're very disturbing. There's a lot of things happening where you're like, what did I just read? So I don't know if it was because I'm part French, so I might be related to these people, but I'm also part Sicilian, so reading about Italy, you'd think that would also have a similar response, so maybe it's not that. So I thought maybe it's because it's set in a more modern time, but people are still like bloodthirsty either way, so that didn't seem to make sense. So I thought maybe it's because they're supposedly Christian now, and so they're supposed to be better than the bloodthirsty pagans that they're taking over. So maybe it's that, I don't know. But for whatever reason, the Merovingians specifically, not the Carolinians, not Frederick II, but it was the Merovingians that really hooked into my gut and just kind of like pulled and just started to haunt me. Just in the back of my head, they were always there because I wanted to know, why were these people making the decisions that they did? I mean, Fredegunda actually physically tortured people. Chilperic taxed people out of their homes and they died because of him. And you had Guntram Boso, who ended up getting killed by a flaming spear or something, and you had these two uncles that killed their nephews just horribly, just gutted them, and then just went home. And I wanted to know why, because I do believe, I agree with Socrates on this point, that people only do things because they think that it is good or will create good. I don't think people do evil thinking, oh, this is evil, ha. I think that there's something in them that thinks that this is actually a good thing. So I think that Fredegunda thought that torturing these people was for some sort of good reason, and Chilperic thought that there was something good in his terrible poetry that Gregory made fun of all the time. And so they just kept sitting there, and I kept thinking, well, why are they doing these things? What is the psyche happening, like psychologically? Why are they doing these things? And so a couple months later, in May of 2016, my students and I were able to put on a performance of an original play we had written, because we had also read The Song of Roland, and I was convinced that it was hilarious and secretly a comedy. And I was able to convince my students of this, and we got permission from the headmaster to take some time aside and we wrote our own play, and we wrote it into a comedy, and we put it all together and we performed it. So it was dress rehearsal night, and I was driving home, and I had this refrain that just went through my head, and I went home and I wrote it down real quick, and that became the first song that I wrote for Gregory of Tours the musical. And then I also wrote a brief thing for Fredegunda, and I was like, yeah, I want to do this. This is really interesting to me. And so I bought the book Gregory of Tours, the History of the Franks, which is here. It's beautiful and fat. And then in August, I was able to go for a week and visit my friend in Texas. And she was doing summer classes at the University of, I want to say, San Antonio? Anyway, wherever it was. And so I had a lot of time where I could sit outside, and I was reading books about the history of the Frankish people and the Merovingians, and I started writing out. I have a basic cast of characters, and the last week I was able to write out a basic plot line, so I know kind of what's happening and who's going to be doing what. And it just really intrigues me. There's so much drama that's happening. So many people related to this person who hates this person, and this person tried to kill this person. You can see that Shakespeare I think really would have liked this story. And so I really want to turn it into a musical. And I want to be able to share these people that I've come to understand and come to grow to like in some ways. And I want to be able to share it with other people. And so thus, I'm doing the odd thing of turning the history of the Franks into a musical. And I hope that one day I can share it with you guys.